And, early on in his life, he had remarkable visions of what the future was going to bring and what his life was going to be all about. Visions of Tibetan lamas and Rinpoches that came to him and gave him guidance. And it went on throughout his life. He was constantly in search of a higher truth, constantly in search of something beyond, what human consciousness can truly comprehend. It went past, all human intelligence, everything. And he worked. I mean, one of his, favorite sayings was work brings more work. And it's really true. Work does bring more work. And when he expressed this in terms of opening to higher energy in the universe, how it's infinite, it's beyond all human capacity to understand, it's beyond all human capacity to absorb. But getting closer and closer to that profound truth provided wisdom, it provided knowledge, it provided a transcendental way of looking at the world, a way of looking at the world that enabled one to see what was an illusion, what was real. And he developed this meditation practice. And the incredible thing about this meditation practice, it was developed from a guy who was born in Brooklyn. He wasn't born from some lotus flower in the Himalaya mountains. And all his life he worked. He ran a gallery, he worked, he supported himself, and he supported many people. But more than anything else, his spiritual work was tantamount to all his other activities. And he surrendered everything in his life. I remember when Muktananda was in America, and he offered to give Muktananda his business. He, Baba, if you want my business, I will give you my business. All I want in return is my enlightenment. I'm not attached to anything. Stuff I have to do every day in life because life requires it. But will that interfere with my quest for enlightenment? No. So he said, Baba, if you want my business, you can have my business. I mean, he had a multi-million-dollar business, Rudi, owned buildings all over, the East Village and, all around Fourth Avenue and 10th Street. He owned half the block. And I remember standing with him once, and one of his buildings was on fire, and the fire engines were there, and, water and this. And he said to me, Stuart, I must really be growing. He said about himself, he said, I don't feel 1 ounce of tension about this situation. One of my buildings is burning, and I don't feel any tension. He said, it's really a test. I must really be growing in my life. Well, anyway, in his life, he created this meditation that we practice. And it wasn't a meditation for people living in ashrams and temples and, monasteries. It was really a meditation for people that were living directly in, the core of life. People that had to deal with family and had to deal with financial problems and had to deal with all the elements of life that usually get everybody crazy. But the meditation he developed was a way of transforming all of it into a spiritual life, not allowing it to get the better of one, but using the mind, using the breath to transform the tensions of life into a spiritual life. And he always talked about the tensions of life, being like compost. I mean, it's human garbage, and what does compost do? It creates an organic garden. And this was one of Rudi's favorite metaphors, that you can use the tension of your life to create an organic garden. And the simple breathing technique that he bequeathed to all of us, which to me is honestly the greatest thing that he left the world, with all the tales about Rudi and the stories about Rudi. Very few people talk about the most basic element that he left to all of us, his double breathing exercise, the purpose of which is to transform the things that are killing us into life-giving energies. And I think that's an extraordinary thing. When I was younger, I honestly was looking for something like that. I knew I could never survive in a monastery. I knew I didn't have a chance in hell of surviving in a monastery. It just wasn't in my nature. It wasn't in my chemistry. I was too much of a gypsy when I was a kid. And I knew I needed something that enabled me to live in the world and to transform this incredible world and life that we live into something sacred. And that the only reason I didn't see it as something sacred is because I wasn't developed enough inside myself to be able to do that. And when I met Rudi, it was the first time in my life I met anybody who taught me, didn't just talk about love, peace, and eat vegetables. He showed me a path that could transform all of the blocks, the tensions, the insecurities, the problems I had in myself into a spiritual life. I was so grateful to have found somebody like that. And as tough as it was to hang out with him, and it really was, I mean, his energy was so powerful that I would go and sit with him. I probably 2, 3, 4 times a week, I would go to his store and sit with him. And I always walked out of his store like a piece of burnt toast. I mean, his energy was so powerful. And yet he transmitted it with love, with consciousness. As I said the other day, I was living in the University of Schmuckdom when I was a kid. But he accepted that and he loved me because I was willing to do the work I had to do on myself to be able to graduate from that university. And that was Rudi. You had 1,000,000% commitment to your spiritual need and your spiritual growth. And he was, he hated bullshit. I remember I stayed in Dallas when I went to Dallas with him. I wound up spending time with this guy who sponsored everybody, very rich guy, they owned insurance companies, and brother was a senator from Texas. And I spent, I think, a week staying with him. Purpose was to help build that budding meditation center in Denton. And he offered to put me up for a week. And I told him, I said, Rudi, the man is, he has images of himself in his attic that looked like Gabriel, the Archangel Gabriel and Michael, and they were images, portraits of him like that. And Rudi, his only comment was, Stuart, and I said, Rudi, they're so wealthy and they live in that world of just social. He said, well, if he wants a spiritual life, at some point, he's going to have to let go of it. He's going to have to let go of everything in order to become a servant of God. Rudi did that. He let go of everything. And although he had lots of money and he had tons of real estate, and all of it was kind of, stuff he had to do in the world in order to succeed and live in life. It never for a moment interfered with his need to have a spiritual life and his willingness to serve God and to serve higher energy in the universe, and to never blink about doing it. It was his job in the world. That kind of surrender I never saw in anybody. Somebody living in the East Village in New York City. And I tell you frankly, one of the reasons I left Texas, I said, Stuart, you got to go to where probably the single most difficult place in the world you can live to have a spiritual life is New York City. So I moved back there because I needed that test. And in order to pass that test, I had to use everything I learned from Rudi, everything. every bit of knowledge and ounce of wisdom that he imparted while I studied with him, I had to use, otherwise I could have never survived. So what he left to the world, in the simplest terms, honestly, is this double breathing exercise, which was the core, the basis, the foundation of everything he did. And it built him and how he, this guy from Brooklyn, Russian Jew from Brooklyn, discovered this exercise that was one of the most ancient forms of kind of Hindu Buddhist teaching, further back than Buddhism. Probably went back 100,000 years. How he discovered this and was able to devise this exercise and to use it and pass it on to people that study with him. I mean, that in itself is, to me, probably one of the most remarkable people of the 20th century. And all of it amounted to one thing: giving life, serving God. To the last moment, his last words were a deeper sense of surrender. Those were his last words in the world, a deeper sense of surrender. Of course, probably one of the hardest points of my life was being with him at the last moment of his life, holding his hand at the last moment of his life. And I can say the only reason I'm alive today, not only did he save my life by teaching me the meditation so that I could transform life into my teacher, but he also saved my life in that airplane. There's no reason anybody should have walked away from that crash. I mean, we used to go up there to the top of that mountain. The plane was in 12 different places on the top of the mountain, and it was amazing that anyone survived that. And they survived because Rudi put his life in them and understood it was his time to leave the world. And I have nothing but gratitude. This meditation should be about nothing but gratitude for this amazing being who was born to truly serve and to truly pass on everything he developed in his life so that other people can also build a life and build a spiritual life and transform all of the problems that human beings have into something that develops the highest levels of their own humanity. I mean, they should have a special holiday for him in this country. And yet, look, he's not like a known figure in the world. He's known in a certain area of people. But, he's not like somebody that they celebrate all over the world when his birthday comes up, But beneath it all, he did miracles. And I can tell you that my life is one of them. It's a miracle that I am alive, that I'm doing what I'm doing, and I'm able to hopefully transmit what he taught me to all of you. And I think, we all have to do this next session just with gratitude. Gratitude, which is the most important thing a human being has to learn, how to be grateful and how to keep their hearts open. Earlier today, I got an email from Bob Sink with a video of Rudi teaching a meditation class. And I don't know how many of you have seen that video or not seen it, but I suggest you get it. It's really something terrific. You sit there and look at him and work with him. He's like a living person in that video, and the energy, the Shakti being transmitted is something extraordinary. So you can get in touch with Bob and he can tell you how to get the video, it's something wonderful. Okay, we'll have a meditation and let's fill the airwaves, Zoom, all of our hearts with gratitude. To me, probably the most extraordinary person, not even probably, the most extraordinary person I ever met in my life. and a person that I truly owe my life to, that I wouldn't be here today doing what I'm doing. There's no way under the sun I could have survived Stuart as he was when he was 25 years old. So God bless him and God bless all of you, and we'll have a meditation practice. Taught me that everything in life is sacred. The inner world, the outer world, all of it is God's manifestation. And all of it is somehow here to be one's teacher. I've said it a million times, I'll say it again. The day I left for Denton, Texas, to teach in Texas, I was in Rudi's store, and he told me something that just truly changed my life. He said, if anyone ever asks you who the guru is, just tell them the guru is life. And it forced me to go so deep in myself to discover the truly sacred nature of life. The fact that each and every human being has a soul, each and every human being is here to learn the depth and the sacredness of life and what life has to teach them so they can grow closer to God. I mean, it took me years to truly learn that, and I don't mean intellectually, I mean, for it to truly become part of my, inner life, organically part of my life. And what it did is it really forced me to stop judging, to stop, opinionating, to stop looking at people in a negative way, and to recognize that when I see negative things in other human beings, all I'm seeing is a part of myself. Otherwise, I wouldn't identify with it. I'm seeing that in me that needs to change. And that's was part of learning that life is a sacred teacher. And of course, without Rudi and without his incredible patience and wisdom and what he was willing to impart in his teachings, it would have been impossible for me to learn that. When I was younger, I didn't know about lineage and being connected to teachers like Rudi and Nityananda. Now I know about that. And they become so integral to my inner work, part of my inner work. In every class, I ask for their blessing. I ask to give me the strength to do what my job is to do on the earth. And how can you forget? How does one forget the way they were when they were 25 years old? The day I met Rudi. And what evolved and what took place and how my life was at 50 some odd, 60 years later. It's a long, no, not 50 some odd years later. That in itself demands gratitude. Thank you. Thank you, God. Thank you, Rudi. Thank you, Nityananda. Thank you, Kala Rinpoche. Thank you, every teacher, and literally every person who's ever sat in a meditation class that I've taught, because every single human being became a teacher. Some taught me wonderful things I had to learn about me, and some taught me things about me that really had to change. And it brings about an element of life that is so important. And that is just humility. Humility. And people associate humility with weakness. Well, it's not the case. To be truly humble and to truly trust life And to truly live in this world without opinions and criticism, you have to be so strong inside because it requires a certain kind of innocence that will be destroyed by all the negativity in life if one doesn't have the inner strength to sustain it. And the only way I got anything that resembles strength of that nature was because of this meditation, that because of what I learned from Rudi. Does anyone have a question? So few questions in the last few weeks. I think I'll stop asking if people have questions.
Stuart, I have a question.
Bob to the rescue. Yes, Bob.
So you speak about those that come to you in this lineage. Is that something that you draw or that comes to you?
It's part of your karma. It comes to you. Look, Rudi came to me because I was so ready to do what he had to teach. I was at a point in my life where, look, first of all, I was going to move to San Francisco. Yeah, really. I had a friend of mine who lived in San Francisco. He was an artist, and I met him in Mexico, and he loved the poems that I used to write. And he said, "Look, I know all the poets and the whatever that poetry thing is. I don't know, Limelight or whatever. Anyway, I know all the people here, Ferlinghetti and Ginsberg and all those people, and they're going to love what you write. And you should come out here and live out here. You'll become really successful." And I was ready to move. I was living in Manhattan, and I was ready to move. And the day I got that letter from him, I met Rudi. And it was such a strange meeting and something beyond what my mind could really understand. The way it happened, how it changed me literally on the spot. How I said to this friend of mine, Charlie, I've got to go back and see this guy again. I don't know what happened there, but something amazing happened there. And I was ready to either go to San Francisco or commit myself to a sanitarium. I was really in bad shape. I mean it, drugs and all the stuff I was doing. And I met Rudi. And I said to myself, Stuart, and I've told this story a billion times. I don't know if I tell it again, how it happened, how I met this guy living in a slum with an apartment with a $500,000 art collection in his apartment in one of these railroad flats. This is an hour after I met Rudi. I said, "Where did you get all this stuff?" He said, "Well, there's a guy in the village named Rudi." I couldn't believe my ears. I said, "Stuart, the gods are talking to you once in your life. Listen, listen." And I went back the next day and my whole life changed. And I wrote this friend of mine in California, I can't come. I met somebody, I think, who is very important in my life. And I have to spend time to learn what this person has to teach me. And I never made it. I made it to San Francisco, so I used to have meditation centers there. But I never made it there to meet Ginsberg and Ferlinghetti and all those people. You know? So it comes when you need it. They say when the student is ready, the teacher will manifest. Then the student has to be smart enough, oh, well, what am I going to learn? What can I learn from this person that can change my life, that can help me grow and have a spiritual life? You have to have those smarts and that kind of need inside. And that's something I had years before I met Rudi, years before. I had just never met the right teacher who really affected me the way he did and was able to transform me the way his teachings did. But years before I met him, I had that kind of a need. I used to create my own mantras and my own meditation practices. I really did. And I would sit in for hours and do these things. And it didn't make me any saner. It really didn't. I'd go to, satsangs, and I used to go maybe twice a week to sit with the Hare Krishnas. I would go and I would smoke a joint. I would go sit with the Hare Krishnas. I mean, and I would go to the Paradox restaurant where they served macrobiotic food. And I thought I was having a spiritual life. And I was still crazy as a loon. And then when I met Rudi, something changed. And I said, Stuart, this is a great master. You have to learn from me. And I had a friend, honestly, it was a very close friend of mine. He was a French kid. He was probably 3, 4 years younger than me, maybe 18, 19. And I used to do these kind of trips with him. We would take drugs, this ayahuasca stuff that people rave about that is very dangerous, and we would do that stuff. This is back in the 60s. I would do that. And I would go on these trips. It was unbelievable. The whole world, the whole apartment became atoms that were flowing through space. And one day he told me, he said, there's a guy in Greenwich Village named Rudi. He's supposed to be a very great teacher. And he said, I went to him, Stuart, and he wouldn't take me because I do drugs. He wouldn't take me. He said, you've got to stop. I'll take you if you stop doing drugs. He didn't want to stop doing drugs. And eventually he died in what he used to call his sessions. He died in a fire. This kid, he was 19 years old. He was a good friend of mine, But that's when I first heard about Rudi. And then every time I walked past Rudi's gallery, I would think, well, this is supposed to be a great teacher in there. I never went in until that one day when I was really ready. I was 3 weeks out of a jail in Spain. I was living on the floor of a friend's apartment because I had no money in Manhattan. And when I walked past that place, and this friend Charlie said to me, Stuart, it doesn't cost to look. God bless him. I'll never forget that as long as I live. I went in there and bingo, there was Rudi. My whole life changed. I was ready. I had beaten my head against the wall long enough that I was ready to begin to listen to somebody else and truly learn what I had to do to get past me. And whatever I had to do, I would do. I don't want to get into the laundry list of stuff we used to do, to, help him and say thank you through work, just. But I was ready. And it was so interesting because the day I met him, he showed me a picture of himself lying on the floor at the foot of some guru in India, probably Muktananda. And there was a picture of Swami Nityananda and it is superimposed in his heart. And that's the first thing he ever showed me was that picture. And only to discover that Swami Nityananda, I met them both on the first day that I met him. It was my grandfather, my spiritual grandfather. But I was ready. But then I could have said, okay, what, blah, 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 this and that, go to San Francisco and meet all the beat poets. And I said, no, I need something deeper in my life, I need something deeper in my life. I need something to finally get past me. And I said, I've got to find out what this person has to teach me. I really told that to myself. And when that guy, Ed Borden, who had that apartment, in this building. I knew him. I used to see him on the stairwells all the time, and I knew him, but I never went into his apartment. When he said, I get all these sculptures and tankas and all kinds of stuff, from ancient India and Tibet. And where'd you get this thing? Rudi, there's a guy, I met Rudi an hour before. Dogs were talking. Thank God I listened. And not only listened, but I said, what can I learn? And you think it was easy getting past me? No, this was a major operation and a major job I had taken upon myself to get past Stuart. Finally become simple enough to be able to be grateful in my heart and to feel God inside me. So when a student is ready, all of this is handed to them. It's all handed to them. They have to be intelligent enough to say, what am I going to do with this? I know Rudi, just before he died, maybe 6 months before he died, every time I would go to his store, same question, are you ready to go to the Middle East? We're going to live in the Middle East. I never in my life thought about moving to the Middle East, living in Egypt or, Jordan or Israel or any place there. I never thought about it. I said, Rudi, wherever you are, I will go. He said, I need to learn from you. My bags are packed and I'm ready to go. Anytime you tell me we're going to go, I will go. I didn't care about anything except getting a spiritual life and knowing that this person was the only person I'd ever met who was capable of helping me get a spiritual life. And one day he said, you can unpack your bags. We're not going to go to the Middle East. I got too much going on here. And we're not going to go to the. I wound up in the Middle East, teaching in the Middle East. I wrote a book about the Middle East called Light in Jerusalem. I don't know how many of you have ever read that book, but it's a very interesting book. I was there when there was a war going on, and I went there just to see what it would be like teaching this meditation in countries that are at war. I wanted to see what it would be like to experience that. And it became a book called Light in Jerusalem. But it was Rudi, it was Rudi. And what I'm trying to do is to pass it on to all of you in as honest a way as I possibly can. I can't do it exactly the way he did it. I am not Rudi. But in all humility, when I sit and teach, he comes through, Nityananda comes through. They're all in the class. Kala Rinpoche's in the class. Ramana Maharshi comes. They all come and visit. Ramakrishna, Sarada Devi, they all come. And the greatest thing I learned about Rudi's work is you can sit with any teacher and do this meditation with them, and they will never deny you whatever they have to teach you. That's what happened with me in Kala Rinpoche. Sitting there and doing Rudi's meditation practice. And in 3 days, I got an entire Tibetan Buddhist education. It was staggering. The translator said to me, he'd been in that monastery 13 years. He never heard these teachings. It was Rudi's practice that extracted that. And Kala Rinpoche knew that who was sitting in front of him were people that truly knew how to work on themselves. Well,
Stu-
yes.
Stuart, I have a question. Does it become clearer what you're actually working on? I'm finding that when my eyes start to close, when I'm losing consciousness with you, that I can't identify what the things are and I don't try anymore. I'm just putting it into the heart and breathing with it. But does it become clearer? I mean, I guess sometimes it's clear, but
Well, what happens is you transform yourself inside, and there's a lack of clarity. But you're so used to identifying things in such a conditioned way, all of that's breaking down. So there's going to be a lack of clarity. And then it comes back together, and you begin to consciously see what's an illusion, what's real, how to make choices, different types of choices in life, how to live in a more open way with yourself and with the people in your life. I mean, you got to go through that kind of dark night of the soul, you know. I mean, Christ went through it, Buddha went through it. I mean, Buddha's fasting in the desert, and Christ is fighting with the devil in the desert, you know. They all went through it. Every saint, if you read the hagiographies of saints,
hmm,
what they went through, and it's that dark night of the soul where there's that lack of clarity, and then it suddenly it all lifts, and you begin to see a much clearer world. And the world has a different radiance than it did before.
I have such gratitude that you're giving this to us in amounts that we can actually take in. We're not overwhelmed. Thank you.
No, I try, you know. I mean, I know. I used to walk out of Rudi's gallery. I'm telling you, I was like a piece of burnt toast. I really did. I used to live on the other side of town. I would walk home just to get. I was like, ah, what happened to me in there? You know, this is very strong work. It is not for everybody in the world. Otherwise, there wouldn't be 20 people sitting here. There'd be 2 million people sitting here. Because this work is so focused on truth. It's so focused on living your life in a real way. Most people can't deal with it. They want, I'm okay, you're okay. You know, they want, you know, it's like cream puffs they want. And we're talking about really, you know, getting to the core of things, getting to major levels of transformation inside oneself.
Thank you. Rudi was so present with you tonight.
You're welcome. Look, I'm even wearing my Swami costume.
Swami Ji.
I've been on this in 20 years. I used to have a great one that Muktananda gave me. I had a beautiful, he gave me an orange robe once. Told me, you're going to be a great teacher one day. Really told me this, Muktananda. And he gave me this silk orange, beautiful robe. I don't even know what happened to it. Somewhere it got lost.
Stuart, I have a question. It's Lynn.
Yes, Lynn.
This morning I woke up realizing I had a dream that my head had fissures in it, and the fissures were opening, and it was like molten lava underneath. And um, I was not in agony, but just alarmed because my head was exploding. And there was a presence next to me that was, I don't know, but
Lynn,
anyway,
the higher forces are working on you. You know, I've been through that many times. suddenly where even bones start moving in my forehead. And you see this whole here, it's like wings of a bird, Phoenix. I mean, I didn't have that when I was 25 years old. It's a product of years of energy, Shakti, separating, the chakra, building the chakra here. And it's like Phoenix, it's like death and rebirth, And the head is, in the forehead is where the third eye is where you get wisdom and where you begin to recognize what's real in life, what's not real. And your mind, your head, the whole structure of your head goes through changes. And the dream you had is just telling you that those changes are beginning to happen to you. And it's great. It's a great thing. Don't be afraid of it. And don't even think about it. Just let it happen. Just let
Okay.
because you're changing inside. That's all it's telling me. I mean, I remember I Rudi asked me to come to New York, and he said, Stuart, you're not going to believe my head when you come here. I've been going through so many changes. My head is, and I got off the plane. It was the first time he ever met me at the airport. I couldn't believe it. He never did that, And I saw his head. I said, oh my God, Rudi, what happened? I couldn't take my eyes off his head. Extraordinary. The energy, the light, what was coming out of him. He said, all of this has taken place in the last month and a half. And I wanted you to come here to benefit from this. What has taken place? So just be grateful and have patience and don't think about it. Don't get yourself crazy about the lava and the heat and it's all there to change you and to help you to grow.
Thank you.
Does anyone else have a question? So go to sleep tonight with a big open heart, a lot of gratitude. Try to let Rudi come in, get Shananda come in, and even let me come in. I'll be happy to come in too. And just, be grateful, right? There's so much to be grateful for in life. And we can't forget that. That's the problem. We forget too easily. Every little drama that comes along begins to tear us apart. And it's all stupid. It all passes. The only thing that doesn't pass is the energy of God manifesting all the time in different ways and teaching us what we have to do to become enlightened beings. So God bless you all and thank you. Again, thank you for being in my life. Thank you for being part of this. And, there'll be class on Sunday and I'm looking forward to seeing everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Stuart. Good night.
And
Thank you.
happy birthday, Rudi.
Yeah.
Thanks for the wonderful class tonight. Thank you.
It was so beautiful.
So beautiful.
Good night.
Good night.